topics and opinions expressed in the following show are solely those of the hosts and their guests and not those of W4CY Radio, its employees, or affiliates. We make no recommendations or endorsements for radio show programs, services, or products mentioned on air or on our web. No liability, explicit or implied, shall be extended to W4CY Radio or its employees or affiliates. Any questions or comments should be directed to those show hosts. Thank you for choosing W4CY Radio.
Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech, inarticulate speech of the heart.
Hello, and welcome to It's Your Voice, the show that hosts enriching conversations in diversity. My name is Kamika Edwards, and I am standing in for Bahia Jackson today, my friend and ally. I am the daughter of Willie and Eddie Edwards, the mother of Devin and Jamila, ages 28 and 25 respectively, and have been a public school educator since 1999. It is my pleasure to fill in for Bahia today. Our guest is Dr. Kwabena Asante, and this episode is entitled Reflections on American African Contributions to Africa. Dr. Kwabena Asante is a climate resilience planner. He supports agencies and communities developing integrated plans for climate change. He serves on the Climate Working Group of the NOAA Science Advisory Board. He has a PhD in Environmental and Water Resources Engineering from the University of Texas at Austin and a BS in Civil Engineering from the University of Nairobi. On this episode, he will walk through his own journey from initial impressions to developing a full appreciation of the role American Africans have played in advancing Africa's self-identity and growth. Today, we'll talk about his personal journey, the historical contributors to Black history through the Civil Rights Movement and apartheid. Dr. Asante, thank you for being our guest today.
Hello, Kamika, and really good to be here.
Thank you for coming. Thank you for being with us. We love to learn and hear different voices and experiences. And so we want to thank you for your time and space that you're sharing with us today.
Yeah, absolutely a pleasure to be here. It's always enriching to have these conversations, to reflect personally and also to hear kind of feedback from others. On my own reflections, my own experiences. So always a pleasure to be able to share from what I'm learning.
Thank you. From your bio, I read that you are an engineer.
Yes.
But during our conversation, you said it's not the engineer that most people think of. Can you tell us what kind of engineer you are?
Absolutely. So I like to describe myself as an engineer who really hates being an engineer, and so always looking for other ways to express myself, to work with in relation to communities, in relations to things around me, to environments around me, and for me, engineering was really. It began as a journey just to try to understand change around me. I was born in Ghana, in West Africa, and at some point along the way there, we moved to East Africa, and I really saw the huge differences in climate, going from the tropical settings in West Africa to East Africa. Really. Those changes really made an impression on me. And so it just really encouraged me to try to understand how some of those change drives how society develops, and the kinds of ways in which infrastructure we build, plans that we put together, essentially connect, are related in many ways to what's happening in the environment around us.
I see.
So as my colleague likes to say, we were in the business of connecting people, and connecting people to resources, connecting people to each other, connecting people to in various ways, and it all begins with trying to understand what's going on in the environment.
Yes. Thank you for always tying it back to our home, planet Earth, and the crisis that we are currently experiencing, and how us as humans, how we can do better together.
Absolutely. It's a journey. It's a journey for all of us. It's climate is evolving. Has always evolved, but is evolving in very different ways now. And for many of our communities, that means big changes to the way we connect to resources, basic resources like water, the air we breathe, our source of food supply, sources of energy. We've got to rethink all those things, and
Yes.
that's for many people that's a huge undertaking. It's just essentially blows the mind when we've got to think about all the many changes that we've got to make.
Yes.
I recall from our conversation earlier, we are very good at dealing with short-term change. We may not like it. We may get upset when the weather suddenly changes, but we're very good at adapting to it. And actually, we're very prepared in many ways to deal with that.
So it's
But
not
when we-
all doom and gloom.
Fortunately, it's not. And there's always big hope in the sense that we have some inbuilt skills that that can help us get across the bridge, across the change. But we first got to understand it, and then we've got to commit to being part of the solution, being part of the process of moving from where we are to where we need to be in the future.
Yes.
That's the essentially that's where the journey begins. That recognition that we're in a place where we need to make change, and what that change is got to look like.
That's a very good place to begin. And thank you for kind of setting up our conversation to keep our common home, our environment in mind as we celebrate and honor both of our heritages, our cultural backgrounds. So I'm very pleased that today is February 22nd, 2023. It's the 22nd day of Black History Month for this year.
Absolutely.
And the theme is resilience, Black resilience. And so both of us are proud to be a part of that group. I identify as African American. I also identify as Black. My family's from Mississippi. We've been in California since 1986. And I'm very disconnected from the motherland, Africa. Genetically, I'm from Ghana. Genetically, I'm from Nigeria. My mom has Ghanaian DNA. So I have on the African hero shirt.
There you go.
Represent.
Perfect. Yeah. Always important to represent.
Yes, and spread awareness. And so we have this platform that Bahia connected us to share our experiences as Americans, as Africans living in America. So tell me, like I said, I'm disconnected from Africa. Haven't been there. I just know my, genetic DNA. But I would love to hear about your experiences in Africa and how they shaped you to who you are.
Yeah. So I have had the privilege of living in very many different parts of Africa. I've visited. I was born in Ghana. Spent kind of part of my early childhood in South Sudan. Spent many of my formative years in Kenya. Lived and worked in Mozambique, in Southern Africa, and so I've visited over probably in the mid 20s, 25 or so, probably close to half of the African countries have had the opportunity to either go and visit in short term or do work there. And so I really feel privileged to have met an array of people on the continent, to have experienced an array of cultures on the continent. But I also was lucky to have the opportunity to come to America and to come and I've lived here since 1995. So we're going on 28 years now. I've had the privilege to live across different parts of the U.S. as well. Came to school in Texas, and then began my professional work in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. I've lived in Louisiana. I live in California now, the Bay Area initially, now in the Sacramento region. I worked in Florida for a little bit. And so again, I've experienced a lot of America and met a lot of good people. And as we celebrate Black History Month, it just seemed like a perfect opportunity for me to reflect on the two sides of the coin, or two sides of the ocean, if we'll call it that, the Atlantic. So and I have an 8-year-old daughter, and this year I think probably for the first time we really have started having conversations about what it means to be African in America, what it means to be African, what it means to be Black in America. My daughter is also half Indian, and so she reflects all those identities. But this is the month in which we celebrate African American achievements.
Yes,
it's Black History Month, but it really is, the focus is really about Africans in America and the achievements of Blacks in America, of Africans in America. And for me, I just felt that just given my own experiences and kind of where I've come from, that perhaps I could give some perspectives on really what African Americans have meant for the continent. Sometimes some of those achievements perhaps are understated, and many may not be aware or at least perhaps have forgotten about some of those achievements. So I think it's important that we always go back and reflect on these for the benefit of those of us in America, but also for those in Africa, as we continue to try to recognize where we've come from and where we're looking to go to.
Exactly. I learned a word, Sankofa, that means it's not taboo to go back and fetch your history, go back and learn where you came from, to inform our present so we can have a better future. And so
Absolutely.
I do believe that as an educator, in public schools, I think it's, history has so many voices and so many faces. And so I love that we are here today to recognize the African-American heroes that have contributed so much to American society.
Yeah. And for me, also to African society, because I think that's a critical piece that often is underappreciated. I mean, we recognize the names of certain key individuals who've done. Martin Luther King Jr. is obviously a well-known name. We understand what his achievements have meant for Blacks in America. Perhaps we haven't paid as much attention to what his achievements have meant for Blacks in Africa, in the wider diaspora. And so I think it really is key that we begin to think about some of those achievements.
Yes.
And yeah.
Yeah. We spoke about W.E.B. Du Bois, right?
And to me, that's a wonderful place to begin, right?
Okay.
Because you know, at the turn of the last century, so the early 1900s, W. Du Bois began to think about what Pan-Africanism means. He began to recognize that while we were looking for individual achievements as individual peoples, as individual nations, that there were certain threads that tied us all together. Certain our history, we share a common history, whether it was a history of segregation, a history of the colonialism. That there were certain common threads that we needed to reflect on and understand, so that we could move on to a better place.
Yes.
And so he began organizing these, and over the course of a period of maybe 20 years, 30 years, he organized 5 total Pan-African conferences, which featured many young leaders from countries that were colonies of the British, of the French, all across Africa, from the Caribbean, from the US as well. And what's significant is that many who attended these conferences eventually went on to lead for the independence movement in Africa.
I see.
Dr. Kwame Nkrumah, who later on became Ghana's first president, was one of those participants.
In the Pan-African conference?
Absolutely. Leopold Senghor was another who went on to become the first president.
Wait, those names that you're saying, are any of them on my shirt? Can you recognize their faces?
I believe that's yes, I believe that's Kwame Nkrumah in the back there. Is
Okay.
that I'm not sure I make those out very well. Is that Kenneth Kaunda in the front? I can't make out the other two very well, but
okay. I just wanted everybody to see my shirt. That's all. Okay. So your African leaders were influenced by the thoughts, the ideas, the principles that abolitionists, not abolitionists, but freedom fighters, people who spoke out against the disenfranchisement of Blacks. They took those ideas and planted lots of seeds in your leaders, and it created independence all over the continent.
It was the motivation for the independence movement.
The catalyst.
Exactly. They sat together, they thought about it, and many of these leaders were the initial drivers of, within the continent, a Pan-African thinking, Pan-Africanist thinking. The idea that we couldn't, as individual countries, do it alone, that we all had to find a way to do it together.
Yes.
Now, in many instances, some of those ideas were opposed, and I would say we struggled with how to carry forward that vision. It wasn't a complete slam dunk. But as personally, from my experiences visiting all these range of countries, the countries that really took hold of those ideas really benefited in terms of the ways in which their economies were developed. The economies were developed with clear thinking that they had to be players regionally within with their neighbors, they had to while it was important to trade with everybody else, trade within Africa was really going to drive their future success. And to me, I mean, I'm not an economist, but anecdotally, the evidence that I've seen was that this was critical to the development and will continue to be critical to the development of Africa. So I really think that when we think about that movement, and it continued also to the civil rights era. We talk about civil rights leaders, and we forget that civil rights movement happened right about the time that many African countries were beginning to gain independence. It took a long time. I mean, from the initial conference in 1900 to 1960, we're talking 60 years.
Not that long ago.
Not that long ago, but it took a long while for that process to play out.
I'm so glad it did. I'm so glad it did.
Absolutely.
You can only realize your full potential once you are free.
Yeah. And so that whole process of moving from essentially, we learned from each other. We used what we learned from each other and from our various experiences to advance towards gaining independence, gaining civil rights.
Yes.
For ourselves. And then we turn to the post civil rights. So the gains of the civil rights movement again continue to benefit many African countries. When African countries became independent, the first question that they began to face was, well, suddenly we have the ability to control our own destinies.
Yes.
But we don't have trained engineers. We don't have trained physicians, trained lawyers. How do we move from that phase to being able to actually run our systems ourselves?
Yes.
And so we in huge numbers, we had to send people outside of the countries to go and receive an education. So within the U.S., the gains of the civil rights movement enabled many African leaders and African professionals to come and study here. My own father was one of those beneficiaries.
Tell me about your dad. Yes, your dad is one of them.
My own dad was one of those beneficiaries. He came to study at UCLA and at the University of Illinois.
Yes.
He came to study medicine here. He was able to go and build a career working in medical research in different parts of Africa because of the education that he received here. And that would not have been possible without the gains of the civil rights era.
I see. It's all connected. I see now.
So the efforts of African Americans to gain rights within the U.S. helped Africa's development, helped the development of individuals, but individuals that needed to come in and fill big roles that essentially there was nobody to fill in the post-independent Africa. And so again, very important to reflect on that connection and to really appreciate the work that African Americans did and how that essentially helped Africa.
It makes me feel very proud. And when we talked before the show, I didn't understand the ripple effect of the achievements and contributions and accomplishments of African Americans here spread globally. I didn't, I was just thinking nationally, and maybe that's just like a human egocentric thing. I'm kind of focused on myself and my local area, my community. But to think that the ideas have traveled far and wide and made an impactful difference in the trajectory of a country, of a nation, of a continent, it makes me feel very proud to represent African Americans.
And for my part, it makes me really feel grateful. And so when I celebrate Black History Month, for me, it's a history of gratitude
Yes.
for really the opportunities that have been afforded me, that have been afforded my family, that have been afforded my nation, that have been afforded my continents, because of the work that African Americans undertook in America. And you know, that's a yeah.
Yeah, that's nothing to, it's definitely a huge thing to be grateful for and appreciate and remember and reflect on. And you're reminding me of to honor my parents who graduated from a historically Black college and university named Jackson State University in Jackson, Mississippi.
Mississippi,
So
yeah.
I certainly, that's where my roots are, my extended family, grandparents, that I certainly wouldn't be where I am without the advancements that my family were able to make through education. And that's the one thing I remember about W.E.B. Du Bois, because we weren't taught a lot of our history here in American schools. But I do remember that he was an advocate for education, higher education, getting what you can to serve the community.
Yeah. And yeah, so I also am grateful for that opportunity that was afforded my father, and eventually I'm also a beneficiary. I was able to come and study in the U.S. as a result of that, and so it's trickled down multiple generations,
and to our children,
so
right?
Our children are able to enjoy the benefits as well.
Yes.
So it's yeah. Again, when you think about change, you think about social change. It begins with an individual. It begins with an individual moving an idea, and the idea takes hold, and the idea causes a change in institutions, and the change in institutions essentially delivers back to individuals in greater numbers. And so we are all effectively beneficiaries of an idea that caused change. And
not just Black people, white people, Asians, Latin Americans, all people have benefited.
Absolutely. Yeah. So,
who are your other Black heroes of Black history?
Yeah. So another kind of focus area that I'd like for us to kind of think a little bit about. More recent times. I guess the apartheid struggle. Again, Nelson Mandela was released from prison in the mid 90s. But there was a long struggle, a 25-year long struggle, which was led in the U.S. by African Americans. I mean, for me, the key figure that I like to think about would be Ron Dellums, who served in Congress, served as mayor of Oakland. He led the divestment effort that essentially Congress, the U.S. essentially should stop spending money, essentially economic sanctions in South Africa, until the system of apartheid was dismantled, until the system which essentially apartheid, essentially segregation, which kept Black people away from white and institutions and white and facilitate essentially almost a similar play on the separate but equal idea, which similarly for a while was the law of the land in the U.S. And so Ron Dellums was key over a 25-year period of consistent effort to ensure that that the U.S. would not trade with South Africa as long as apartheid remained in place. Now, he faced a lot of resistance. The U.S. Did in fact continue to find ways to continue to trade, but he remained steadfast in his fight, and throughout the period. I also want to there were also business leaders that supported this effort. So, and in particular, I think the Reverend Leon Sullivan, who was a reverend, but served in business circles. He was actually a member of the board of General Motors, and he devised a set of principles that were later referred to as the Sullivan Principles, about how people should be treated, how people should be treated in the workspace.
Really?
And in effect, he pushed hard for corporations not to work with South Africa, not to trade with South Africa, until such time as those principles were upheld. In his net impact, over 100 U.S. companies stopped trading with South Africa because they could not meet
in their money.
They could not meet those standards.
Yes.
Again, was a huge struggle internally with GM, internally with the different companies that he persuaded. But over time, his efforts were recognized. In fact, UN Secretary or former UN Secretary General Kofi Annan eventually worked with him to develop a global Sullivan Principles, which was the application essentially said that those principles were so clear and so meaningful that they could be applied to businesses everywhere, and was adopted by the United Nations. So
it wasn't how employees are treated in the workplace.
Absolutely.
I see.
Absolutely. Cool. And I'd encourage you to go.
I will. I wrote it down right here. I wrote it down.
Very good. And go to think about them a little bit. Yeah. And so it wasn't just the Congressional Black Caucus. It was business leaders. And I'm picking examples that I'm most familiar with, and perhaps. Yes. I feel the impact was most significant, but there are many others that contributed in their own various ways. And to me, part of the surprise of all of this is that we've lost the we don't recognize some of these folks for what they did. You know. When we talk about, we remember a few leaders, but we miss out leaders who committed themselves over a significant period of time to follow certain places where they felt that they could make the big change.
Yes. That's very encouraging to anyone, any citizen can use their voice, use their resources to affect change right where they are.
Critical lesson from all of this. Critical lesson that we all have skills, we all have our niches.
Yes.
Now it takes work, even in your niche, to find how you can be most effective. But when you find that, stick with it, push it, even when it seems like the ball is not moving. Keep at it and get it. Keep at it until you can move it to the place where you want it to be in terms of achieving that change.
I hope all the young people are listening.
Absolutely, and I hope there are some. And there's one other that I want to talk about, a more recent example. The Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, which was passed about in 2000. This has become the most significant trade treaty that the U.S. has with Africa. U.S. has similar trade treaties with lots of other regions in the world. Again, often reflecting the heritage of the majority, right? Because we have a majority Eurocentric population. The tendency is to establish trade relations with Europe. Our NATO alliance is a perfect example of that. For a long time, Africa did not have that kind of relationship with the United States. We relied largely on interactions through aid and business initiatives that individuals undertook. And so it's for me, it's critically important that we recognize in those efforts the efforts of Rosa Whitaker, who again a Black leader. She served for a while as assistant U.S. Trade representative for Africa, and she was critical. She at least as I understand it, drafted most of that law.
Rosa Whitaker.
Exactly. He drafted most of that law that was eventually introduced in Congress by Jim DeMott. But she wrote that law, and again, to me, it's an example of an individual using their preparation, using the understanding of systems to effect change in a place in which they were able to advance. The AGOA, that Africa Growth and Opportunity Act, has resulted in rapid, at least the last statistic that I saw, over the first probably 10 years or so, a five time increase, basically the amount of trade between the balance of trade between the US and Africa increased fivefold. That's a 500% increase.
Wow. I was wondering the impact of the AGOA, African Growth Opportunity Act.
And it's not, I mean, in terms of the impact is not completely, it's not completely felt yet. I would say that it set rolling a set of events, which just in the way I understand how change works, I would say that over time that we're going to see more impacts. It's one of those rare bills that has bipartisan congressional support, and has been renewed a couple of times already on a bipartisan basis, and I hope it continues, because a trade relationship is really critical to the development of Africa, African economies, of the way we see ourselves. Reliance on it hasn't gotten us anywhere. Reliance on business opportunity and essentially being treated fairly in the economic marketplace has driven change, has driven meaningful change. And so when we begin to see U.S. companies beginning to move to Africa, I think, wow, that finally we're beginning to look at African countries as potential trading partners. There's still some barriers to be overcome, but that transition, to me, began, at least as far as I can see, began with the passage of AGOA. So
that reminds me, as a citizen, to be knowledgeable about the legislative policies, to do my best to be an active participant in our democracy. by, holding our legislators accountable and staying abreast of not the politics, but the changes that will help move communities, societies forward. And
Absolutely.
so
Absolutely.
I want to highlight that point, to stay active in civic duty or civic responsibilities.
And I also want to touch on a little piece there, which says, take the opportunity to go to Africa if you can. To me, it's eye-opening that in many of these instances, many of the people that we're talking about, the change makers in that domain had experience with Africa, had interactions with Africans, had interactions with African businesses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so it's critical because there's a certain, when you begin to establish relationships, when you begin to gain more familiarity, you see the opportunities. You look beyond the headlines.
Stereotypes.
And you begin to see opportunity.
Yes.
I mean, let's talk about what was my first interaction with African Americans. It was through the media, right? Growing up in Africa, I grew up watching African Americans on the screen and TV shows. I mean, Family Matters, Good Times, Sanford. I mean, it was that was my first introduction to African Americans. And then you begin to ask questions about why do they speak a little different from me? Why how do they end up there? Why are they? And you begin to essentially process that there are great similarities, but there's also opportunity in the differences. There's opportunity in the different environments in which people find themselves. There's opportunity in finding that, hey, we have something in common, and we can exploit what is different in our environments for our mutual benefit.
And differences are not to be scared of or to be shied away from.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. I mean, we're having a great conversation here, right? If we started out and I said, no, she was born in Mississippi, I was born on the other side of the Atlantic, there's too much, our environments are too different, we're never going to understand each other. This would not be possible, right?
I agree. It just takes time and patience.
We share and we find, hey, you know what? We both benefited from parents getting an education.
Yes.
We've shared. We have connections in other ways, but it's amazing that you can discover these connections only when you're able and willing to engage.
Yes.
And so, right. I really urge that, and other races, as I've seen it, do it very well. If you've ever traveled in Europe in the summer, every person of that has ancestry in Europe tries hard to go and visit. Whether it's touring in going to visit Irish relatives or all across the continent, they essentially go out and reconnect with their heritage.
Yes.
Because reconnecting with your heritage,
doors, removing barriers to citizenship, is Ghana has the whole program to welcome home, come back. Get connected to your roots. And since testing your DNA has been popular and learning from your roots, I have wanted to go to Africa ever since I found out I'm mostly Nigerian or West African, and I'm excited to go. And I can't wait to go. And if one more person tells me, oh, I got this from Africa, it's like, stop. I want to go. I want to see for myself, because there's too many stereotypes in my head. And I don't want stereotypes.
And you're uneducated. So you get to interact with young people. Again, begin to point out those opportunities. Yeah, and I really hope that you go, not just to Nigeria. Make sure you go to Ghana as well. But when you get the opportunity, go to other parts of Africa. They're very different.
And
They're
Europe and
very
Australia.
different.
And connect and take the time to engage and connect with whoever's in front of you. Put down the phone, give them your attention, listen, and be engaged.
Yeah,
It matters.
absolutely. So it's a journey. But again, to me, always important to recognize the opportunities that have been afforded to us.
Yes.
As a result of all of these interactions.
And I have my homework. I'm going to do more research on rondellums. I'm going to do more research on the Sullivan Principle and Rosa Whitaker and AGOA. I feel enlightened and I feel enriched by our conversation. And
absolutely. It's for me, it was exciting to learn about some of these. I mean, I knew about the impact that some of those programs had on Africa, but I really had not looked under the cover, the hood, quite as clearly. I mean, I knew some of these individuals and some of these what they'd done, but I hadn't really looked under the cover in any depth to try to understand the people behind them, what drove them, what kind of their motivation, what got them to the place where they recognized the opportunity. And so for me, I just thinking about it, researching, it kind of is I learned a lot, and I continue to look forward to learning more.
What is your hope that we do? What is your hope for the Earth, for the planet? With all of our contributions and all of our talents and all of our niches and our personal abilities, what is your hope?
That's a big question and a difficult one, but essentially, I think humanity we've built too many walls. We've built way too many walls. And for me, every wall that comes down is a reason to celebrate. And so I hope that as humanity goes forward, that we learn to break down more walls. I mean, and most of the walls that we talk about don't exist in reality, right? We talk about African countries. There is no wall among those countries.
Borders.
They are artificial walls that have been created. We talk about within Africa, different tribes. There are no walls there. There is no clear definition of who's here and who's there. We talk about Americans. We all Americans from different places. We all came from different places. Even the Native Americans even came here from some place. And yet we continue to struggle to hold on to these walls and to build new ones whenever opportunities arise.
Yes.
So when I go to sleep at night, I dream of one more wall coming down. I don't know what it will look like when we have no walls, but I certainly dream of the process.
I am going to stand in hope and faith with you that more walls come down and that we can become united as a human race. I'm grateful for our conversation. I'm grateful for what I've learned from you, and I feel closer to Africa now.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to come and chat about the continent, about the. I feel there's still a lot more of the story to be told.
Yes.
I am able to touch on a tiny sliver of it, but when I see the way in which the continent is evolving,
Yes, it's worth it. It's all worth it. The
and
impact.
the footprint of African Americans remains strong on the continent.
Yes.
You talk about music.
Thank
You
for that final
cannot
thought.
ignore the influence of jazz on our music. You cannot ignore the
Exactly.
influence
So
of
many
hip hop,
influences.
of rock, of R&B. That's African American music that has changed the continent.
Yes.
Yeah, and it goes on. I mean, you talk
Yes.
about talk shows. When I see a talk show, I feel like, whoa, what is that? Did I just watch the African version of Oprah, or was that the Arsenio Hall show I just watched? Yeah, those
Dr.
influences.
Asante, there's going to be so many more contributions to come, because our young people are ready to help Africa grow and become the leaders that we hope they are. And I'm going to ask our audience to be sure to tune in. Well, I should thank you first. Thank you, Dr. Kwabena Asante, for your time. And for all of you listening, be sure to tune in next Wednesday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time on W4CY.com or Talk for TV. May we all have enriching conversations and diversity this week. Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Inarticulate speech of the heart. Inarticulate speech of the